YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of This Week in Bodybuilding. This is episode 2, and today we are going to be discussing some of the goings on in the open bodybuilding realm. Firstly, we're going to be discussing big news coming out of Tampa, Florida. 212 defending Olympia champ Derek Lunsford given a special invite to compete in the men's open at this year's Olympia. Some big time news. In the past, I've definitely been against anybody getting a special invite. I was vocally and openly against Big Ramy getting a special invite in 2020. I just felt like this guy really hadn't earned that type of grace, and then he proved me wrong and went out and won the Olympia. So you kind of live and you learn. Now, I think in Derek's case, it's a win-win for everybody involved. It's a win for the fans, it's a win for the promoters, and it's a win for the athlete. We know for sure as an industry, Derek's best look is well beyond 212 pounds. So from a promoter's perspective, does it make sense to take on the risk of one of your premier athletes that you can market showing up missing weight for 212 and not competing in the show at all? You cannot take on that type of risk. It was really a no-brainer from a business perspective to give Derek the invite. And I think it'll be interesting because it's probably a little bit risky on Derek's part, never having peaked what is probably going to be like a 225 or 230 pound physique for a show, and he's going to do it on the biggest stage. But I think there's not many people that have a higher ceiling, regardless of what division they're in, than Derek. So I'm excited to see it. And I think he's a contender to be in that top 6 in his Olympia debut for the Open. Now, long term, I think the sky is the limit. I think we're talking about somebody that has the potential to eventually win the Open. We're talking about some of the guys that are, predictably ahead of him right now. Ramy, Bonac, Curry, even Hottie. These guys are up there in age, and we don't know how much longer they're going to have in competitive bodybuilding. There's this new wave of elite open pros that are kind of rising to the top, and it wouldn't surprise me if Derek rose to the top of that group. So we have one guy that's in the Open Olympia. We have one guy that's out of the Open Olympia. Reagan Grimes has decided to forego the Olympia this year in favor of off-seasoning and growing to put on size. Anybody that follows me knows I'm a huge fan of Reagan. I think he has Olympia winning potential as well. And I respect him for his grind. He's consistently competing as a professional, getting his name out there, bringing, a pro-worthy physique to a stage time and time again, winning open shows and qualifying for the Olympia even. But we have seen that the recurring theme with Reagan and the limiting factor is size. And even at the highest levels of genetics, this game still takes time. So I think it's a great decision for him for the long term to kind of put the here and now aside, play the long game a little bit, fill out that frame, and then come back and do some damage. I think he's another guy. He's maybe not as established as some of the other up-and-comers of that second group for the Olympia. But if he fills that frame out, his potential is as high as anybody's. So looking forward to seeing what he can do in the off-season. Now, for the Arnold UK, on the first episode of this, I got all these comments of people that are like, Andrew Jacked is competing. You didn't talk about Andrew Jacked. I know I didn't talk about Andrew Jacked. At the time that I recorded, the latest on Andrew was that he was going to stay in the States to focus on the Olympia. He didn't want to risk going to the UK, not being able to get back. Easy to say now, but Had I included him in my prediction show, I would have had him as a clear winner, just based on what we saw in Texas. Coming out of Texas, if you follow my content, you know I identified him as somebody that I expected to be in that top 5 or top 6 discussion. So not a terribly difficult prediction to say that he would have won that show. I'm seeing some different comments about Andrew. I thought he was probably just as good as he was in Texas when you consider two things. The lighting in Texas is known as probably the best in the pro league, and he was also better with his oil in Texas than he was in the UK. The UK, the lighting, other than the two middle spots, like middle and center right, the lighting was awful. I've seen photos of the same athlete 2 minutes apart from different spots in the stage, and it looks like there's 10 weeks of dieting in between the photos. Just unacceptable. But with that said, I think the overall finished package that Andrew brought was not quite as eye-popping or impressive as it was in Texas, but structurally, size-wise, I think enough to be crowned a deserving winner. Patrick Johnson, someone else I didn't discuss on the preview show, and I apologize, I wasn't familiar with Patrick or his physique. He was big, he was hard. Only a couple of things that I see is that his back could be better, and maybe his oil could have been a little bit better, maybe a little bit more oil on that type of complexion would have brought out some more pop, but a very good showing. James Hollingshead comes in third. I'm a big fan of James's, so following his content this season on his YouTube, on the different podcasts that he's on, and hearing his kind of mindset coming into this show this year, I think he nailed what he wanted to do at this show. And for that, was super excited for James. One of the more introspective and thought-provoking bodybuilders that we have in the industry. He's someone that I look at and I just feel like it's difficult not to root for them. So now, all that bias aside, he brought a crazy fucking package. I mean, we're talking, he was probably in the 270s on stage, and one of the 2 or 3 most conditioned guys up there as far as actual body fat percentage and how it looked from the back. Really impressive stuff if you're a fan of open bodybuilding. He was big, he was round, and he did this without sacrificing condition or like his presentation. I thought he did a good job watching some of the videos, especially the 4K videos. He did a good job with his midsection. It's not a strength as far as the detail that he has in his midsection, but controlling it for a bigger guy was also a plus for him. So I just think his oil and his color could be better. His tan looked a little like muddied, and I've seen that multiple times from James. I think the problem might be that he's just one of these see-through, transparent white dudes that doesn't bother to try to tan before the show, and then you just try to salvage it last minute with the applied tan, and it's a little bit of a Hail Mary. So I would honestly like to see him put in some melanotan and just get dark leading into the show. Martin, I don't want to skip over Martin. So Martin was 4th, and I thought he looked fantastic. He was dug out, peeled. His physique, top to bottom, front to back, is very complete. And he's got great roundness to his physique. Now, I would say at this show, it looked to me like he was a little bit flat even. And even so, you still see that roundness that maybe you wouldn't see on another physique when it's flat. So my comments for this show and presenting what he currently has, I think he's pretty much on the money, but just slightly flat. I think moving forward, the limiting factor for him is size, and he just needs to be bigger. Mark Hector, the big return to the stage, the much anticipated return to the stage for Mark Hector, and I thought he delivered for the most part, depending on what your expectations were coming into the show. I did not expect him to show up and just blow the doors off everybody. I talked about it in the first preview episode that I did. But with that expectation that he wasn't going to show up and win the show, I was super impressed with Mark. He's much better, he's much bigger, and not just in the legs. I think everything is bigger, and even so, he's more balanced. Now, I will say, as far as what he brought to the stage, when you put on that much new stage weight, especially you saw in his legs, there's a lot of new muscle. It just doesn't have that same type of conditioned look that a well-developed, mature muscle has. And no better example than looking at Mark's physique just top to bottom. If you look at his front shots, like a most muscular, his chest, his delts, and his arms are mind-boggling. The striations, the fullness, the pop to the muscle, he looks like his conditioning is on the money. Then you look at his legs really from all angles, and the development and the conditioning wasn't quite there. And I think that's just because it's new muscle. So that will just come with time. I think for his posing in his front shots, he's bending too much at the knee, and he's leaving too much of a gap in between his two legs. Especially being that they weren't stripped and peeled, they looked a little funny, like they were out on an island by themselves. I mentioned how unacceptable and poor the lighting was in general at that show, especially a show with the title of the Arnold UK. And then moving on to the France show, so that was just a week later, and we had many of the same characters show up. Patrick Johnson, I thought, was a deserving winner. He brought pretty much the same package and was a deserving winner. Mark Hector, I thought, was better. I think his color and his oil were better, and he was also a little bit tighter. I haven't heard or saw, but I would venture to say he was probably 5 or 6 pounds lighter in the France show than he was at the Arnold UK. And then Jamie the Giant finishes third. I've talked about it. I'm always impressed with Jamie. He has put a ton of muscle on maybe the biggest frame in bodybuilding, so big respect to him. So that wraps it up. That's the second installment of This Week in Bodybuilding. Thanks for everybody that checked it out. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, send it around. You guys know what the deal is. Check out the Nutrabio and the Unbound products. And until next time, guys, I'm out.